Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi. Good evening and welcome to another live edition of Hada Tonight. I'm Ali Coleman. I'll be your host for a portion of tonight's program. Junaid Dar is also going to be joining us tonight for the social segment. In the program tonight, we're going to be dedicating the balance of our time. In fact, the entire program is going to be dedicated to Syria. We're looking with great interest at the interest and concern with the situation in Syria, specifically this intensification of military activity in the city of Aleppo. There have been, at least over the past 4 days, more than 90 people killed as the Russians and the Syrian military regime from Bashar al-Assad try to reclaim and take control of this divided city of Aleppo. We're going to be looking at this from a number of different perspectives. We're looking at this, obviously, militarily, practically, what's happening, the impact. We're looking at humanitarian aid deliveries. And also in the wider arena, we have a story about a young Syrian activist who is an anti-government activist who was detained by British police when she arrived to receive an award in the country. This is an award-winning young Syrian woman who had her passport confiscated because of orders by the Syrian government. We're going to be looking at, as I said, this subject of Syria and in particular this intensification in Aleppo tonight in our program. It's all, in other words, it's all about Aleppo, Syria tonight. And we're looking at it also, of course, we're inviting one of our sheikhs to join us tonight to talk about the Islamic perspective of this, especially when it comes to humanitarian approach, what our response should be. So we would like, inshallah, to talk about this tonight for both our news as well as in our social segment. We take a short break and come back and start with our news segment. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi. Good evening and welcome back to Hada Tonight. As we said, we're dedicating this program, both the news segment and the social segment tonight, to Syria, in particular looking with great interest and concern with Aleppo, Syria. Before we start with our first item about Syria, one piece of unfinished business from yesterday. We talked in yesterday's news segment about this protest of Facebook by Palestinian activists because some of the editors of Palestinian news agencies have had their accounts suspended. Some of them have been deleted, at least 10 people. And as a result of this, Palestinian activists have come together to boycott Facebook. Alternative social media for Muslims was launched in April of this year. It's called muslimface.com. You can go there. They're governing the social media according to Sharia laws. In other words, it's Muslim friendly without all the offensive aspects. If you're looking for an alternative and you are participating in this boycott of Facebook, you can go to muslimface.com for an alternative. For our first news item this evening, we would like to go to Aleppo and look at the United States and Russia. They have continued blaming each other over the failed efforts to broker a ceasefire in Syria and reach a cooperation agreement between the two countries. Meanwhile, the Syrian city of Aleppo has suffered a recent military bombardment that has claimed the lives of more than 90 people. The attack has been attributed to a joint military operation by Bashar al-Assad's regime as well as the Russian military. The United States blamed both governments. One U.S. official, Samantha Power, she is the United States' ambassador to the United Nations, on Sunday. She spoke to the members of the United Nations Security Council. Ms. Power said, quote, that instead of pursuing peace, Russia and Syrian President Bashar al-Assad make war, end quote. Ms. Powers told the UN Security Council that, and she described the situation in Syria as obscene and apocalyptic. And she also said, quote, that even now, We will continue to look for any way possible to restore the cessation of hostilities, but it is common sense. A one-sided cessation of hostilities cannot hold, end quote. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for Putin's government rejected the United States' accusation, saying, quote, that the overall unacceptable tone and rhetoric of the representatives of the United Kingdom and the United States can damage and harm our relationships, end quote. As for Assad's intensification against Aleppo in an effort to reclaim this divided city, intense air raids, they rained down on the east part of Aleppo for at least the past 4 days, where opposition forces have been, they have strongholds. It has been described by journalists and analysts looking at this intensification as the worst violence that has hit the city in years, going back to the start of the civil war in Syria. The Observatory, a non-government organization on the ground reporting to the world about the situation there, said that they had documented the deaths of more than 235 people, including nearly 40 children. Of those documented deaths, 162 were in opposition-held part of East Aleppo. Over the past week, if we expand it beyond just a few days, the number increases to around 400. Again, that's according to the civil defense workers in Syria. We'd like to move to our next story. We go back to the United Nations. If you recall, they have been conducting, they started last week, the 71st UN General Assembly meeting. And there's lots of very heated commentary that was exchanged by the members of the UN Security Council on Sunday over the situation in Syria, with blame being flung on all sides. Western governments are blaming Syria and Russia, while Russia says that the United States is a problem in the equation. The United Nations Syrian envoy, Mr. Staffan de Mistura, he said, quote, that these are indeed very chilling days for Syria and particularly for the people of Aleppo, as last week was one of the worst in the 6th year of this conflict, end quote. He also said that a so-called military solution or victory is impossible in Syria, end quote. Mr. de Mistura, he told the council that Aleppo is being reduced to rubble in the face of, quote, remarkable new intensity, unprecedented in scale and type of bombing. He also reminded the members of their responsibility, the members of this UN Security Council. He said, quote, that this council has the responsibility to relaunch the cessation of hostilities, end quote. During the UN's 71st General Assembly meetings in New York last week, Russia expressed a commitment to end the violence in Syria. However, Britain's UN ambassador, Mr. Matthew Rycroft, he said, quote, that commitment by Russia resembles much of Syria, broken, lifeless, end quote. Mr. Rycroft took the step further by making a taller allegation against both sides, saying that it is difficult to deny that Russia is partnering with the Syrian regime to carry out war crimes, end quote. He also said that he believes that Russia, quote, has no credibility left on these issues, end quote. Now, obviously, Russia had to reply to these accusations. The ambassador to the UN for Russia, Mr. Churchin, he responded to Britain and the United States and their criticism against Russia by saying that Russia has always sought to compromise on ceasefire issues, and described the peace effort, quote, as an almost impossible task. Mr. Churchin also blamed the United States for dragging its feet and reining in moderate opposition forces that are fighting against Assad's regime. He also, the Russian UN ambassador, also defended Bashar al-Assad for displaying what he described as enviable restraint. So while these political entities, major world powers, are battling each other, over who's to blame. People are being killed, and the country continues to be dragged through this very destructive and crippling civil war. Economists with the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, United Nations say that Syria will take at least 100 years to recover economically to where it was prior to 2011. So it's a very desperate situation, and we need parties to work together quickly and remove all this pride and all this kind of stuff. We stay obviously with Syria for our next story and go to look at Turkey and its involvement in Syria. For 4 weeks now, the Turkish military has launched an anti-Daesh border security operation. It's codenamed Operation Euphrates Shield. It started across the Syrian border in the Syrian city of Jarablus with coordinated air and ground forces, including artillery fire. It has been very successful, but Turkey's foreign minister, Mevlut Cavusoglu, he says that the operation is not over. In fact, Mr. Cavusoglu, he said on Saturday, he confirmed that Turkish forces are remaining in the country, are now pushing further inside Syrian territory, moving artillery and other ground forces an additional 45 kilometers inside Syrian soil. Cavusoglu, he told reporters, quote, that initially we may move at least 45 kilometers down, and we must move further down in order to seal off an area referred to as Manbij region. That's about 500 kilometers. It's considered a de facto safe zone. Now, Turkey's targets, however, are not limited to Daesh. It also has in its crosshairs the PYD, the Democratic Union Party. They are affiliated with the PKK, that is listed as a terrorist organization. Turkey blames this group for a number of major terrorist attacks that have been conducted and carried out in major Turkish cities that have claimed the lives of hundreds of civilians. Turkey, we want to also remind you that Turkey is also recovering from a July coup attempt that it blames on these organizations affiliated with Fethullah Gulen, this Turkish national who has a worldwide international organization who is now living in exile in the United States. Turkey is continuing, they say, the Turkish leadership says that the ball is in the U.S. court in terms of the request, the formal request that they have made weeks ago to have Gulen extradited back to Turkey to face charges of treason and other charges. They have, the Turkish government has been pursuing Gulen for years for a number of different charges. And so the U.S. government, the Turkish authorities are waiting for the official response, which they haven't gotten yet, about the extradition request, which Turkey has a treaty with them. They have an extradition treaty. They're waiting for the response, inshallah. We would like to move to another party that is involved, heavily involved in Syria. That is Iran. We go to a joint press conference that was made between the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mr. Ali Larijani. He met on Monday in Tehran with the Speaker of the Syrian People's Assembly, Ms. Hadaya Abbas. And in that joint press conference, Iran affirmed that it will continue to provide political and economic support to Syria. Now, in this joint press conference, after they met, the two sides affirmed that they will continue coordinations and consultations regarding combating terrorism, as well as parliamentary cooperation. In terms of the things that the Syrian politician had to say, Ms. Abbas, she said that her meeting with the Larijani, this Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, was productive. She characterized it as the meeting as being productive, particularly, she said, regarding fighting terrorism. She also stressed that Syria is fighting terrorism on behalf of the entire world, and that it will continue doing so until all of Syria is clear of terrorism. She said, Ms. Abbas did, quote, that every day we achieve major victories over terrorism, but sadly, There are those who claim to fight terrorism and at the same time provide all manner of support to terrorism. Obviously, this is a reference to the United States. Both Iran and Syria believe that the forces that it describes as moderate forces are actually terrorist forces. So there are many very powerful interests here involved. Syria is something that the world is looking at, especially with its intensification in Aleppo. We will take a telephone call now by a co-director of a British Muslim organization. It's called the Association of British Muslims, Mr. Mohammed Abbasi. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Hada tonight.
Wa alaikum salam, brother, and assalamu alaikum to your viewers.
Yeah, thank you very much for being with us. Just a few questions, if you don't mind, about what's going on in Syria. One of the residents in Syria said, quote, that there is now a ghost, it is now a ghost city. And usually I get used to barrel bombs and I could sleep normally, but now I can't. And new mistakes are also loud and horrifying. So the thing that they're saying, this person in Syria is saying that they had gotten accustomed to a certain measure of military activity, but it has gotten intensified. Would you like to address this intensification?
Sure. I mean, the thing is now the violence has been increasing in Syria since I think it was about 2011 when initially things kicked off. What actually matters is we need to understand that the future stability of Syria is essential, not just for the Middle East, but for the world. It's, the pain and the suffering within Syria has been increasing. The racial, religious diversities of Syria have been challenged, are being challenged. People are dying, but we need to collectively focus for the Syrian people. And the focus should be on the families and the children, whether in Aleppo or the parts of Syria. And I think collectively we need to focus on bringing peace to the people of Syria.
Brother Mohammed, I'd like to ask you, the role of journalism in this situation and any situation of conflict is very important. Photojournalism is very powerful. Some of the images that are captured are very useful in terms of moving people's emotions, changing their perspective. Would you like to address the subject of photojournalism and some of the photos that are being produced for the international press?
I have actually initially when this conflict started, not just in Syria but other parts of the Middle East, the pain and the suffering on the people, especially young children, is horrifying. It's actually very emotional, very traumatic, not just for those people who are suffering on the ground, but those people who are watching. But something that we need to understand as people who are not involved in conflict, we need to understand that the pain and the suffering of the people in Syria or the parts of the world is real. And the images that are beaming in through the social media or mainstream media, I think we should not gloss over. I don't think we should stop those images coming through, because people need to know what violence is. The logical consequence of war and violence is we will have people, innocent people, dying, suffering, being maimed.
Yeah, you're good ideas about this, because many of us, especially in the internet age, and all these computing games with violence, it becomes somewhat of a, we're detached from the reality of it. So it's a good point that you make. I'd like to add, I'd like to turn our attention to Russia. They are one of the two parties, including Syria, that are responsible for this increased fighting in Aleppo. They're trying to take over, reclaim Aleppo. Would you speak generally about Russia's ambitions where Syria is concerned?
Well, you see, during the Cold War, when Russia was called the Soviet Union, from 1947 to 1991, Syria was an ally of the Soviet Union or Russia in opposition to Western powers. And from there, basically, a strong political bond grew between these two nations. Russia has also supported the internationally recognized government of Syria since the beginning of the Syrian crisis in 2012 and has been giving it military aid, political aid, economic aid, etc. Also, you got to understand that the Russian Navy has a base at the Tartus port in Syria, which is Russia's only naval facility in the Mediterranean region. And Russia is looking out for Russia's interests at the end of the day. And I think every nation is looking out for its interests at the end of the day, but the people of Syria are suffering.
Yeah.
And, we shouldn't speak in favor of any country, but we should speak in the favor of the people of Syria. And whether the assault or the attacks are taking place by the terrorist groups or by other countries or even the Syrian military on the people of Syria. The people of Syria are the innocent party in this. And I think the whole focus should be on finding a solution that favors the Syrian people.
I'd like to turn to some of the remarks that were made by the leaders, officials from the United States and Britain. They have been describing these actions, this intensification in Aleppo, as barbaric, as war crimes. Do you believe that this type of language against Russia is politicized?
Our Foreign Secretary, the British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, has said that the West lacks a viable strategy military strategy in Syria, and that Russia could be guilty of war crimes if it has been involved in the bombing of civilian targets. That's what he said. But the thing is, again, you see, everyone is in the dock of international opinion. We are all in the court of international opinion. What is happening to the innocent people in Syria? You see, many, I would say, if you take the issue of war crime is defined as when you attack civilians in the knowledge that they are unarmed civilians. This is something that the UN and other nations need to understand before they get involved or support any war, whatever, not just in Syria. But again, we are all in the dock of international opinion by not finding a quicker solution to the pain and suffering that the Syrian people are going through. My concern, again, is not so much as taking anyone's side in this war, apart from the Syrian people, but, finding a way to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people and help the Syrian people bring peace to their nation and also, be honest about the suffering, be honest about what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if you read Russia Today, a state-run or a state-supported publication, they have pieces that are analyzing it, describing the United States as the problem in the equation, that they are criminally liable for the continuation of the situation. So both are slinging these accusations back and forth. One last question, Brother Muhammad, if you don't mind. If we can turn to an Islamic perspective, how should we as Muslims be looking at the suffering of our brothers and sisters in humanity and in Islam?
One of the things is we as Muslims need to understand that our brothers and sisters are all humanity. Everyone is our brother and sister. We're all descended from the Prophet Adam, peace be upon him. So we're all descended from the Prophet, as it were. And we need to understand that when we look at another human being, that human being is basically our cousin, our brother, or our sister. And we need to do everything we can to help them if they are suffering. If they are hungry, we need to feed them. If they are thirsty, we need to give them water. Look what's happening in Europe now. You've got hundreds of thousands of refugees fleeing violence from the Middle East and North Africa. And this has become a major issue in Europe. And, the European people, not just European people, I would say, the Arabs from the Saudis, the Jordanians, the Turkish people surrounding Syria, and even inside Syria, are trying to do their best to deliver food and clean water, improve people's health, give them shelter, help the children. with trauma. And I think we need to redouble our efforts, whoever we are, not just as Muslims, but everyone, to alleviate these people's suffering. What we can do as individuals, we can, donate more, we can tell our friends, we can start campaigns. Mm-hmm. We can maybe even sign petitions for, to kind of like help our governments understand that the pain of the Syrian people is all our pain. Mm-hmm. And find a way that we can find a way basically to get the Syrian people to help them move forward, because our whole focus should be on the Syrian people and not on any particular political side.
Yeah. Very good points, and we appreciate you being with us, sharing your time with us, Brother Muhammad Abbasi. Assalamu alaikum to you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your
efforts. Wa alaikum salam. Thank you very much. Thanks so much.
And again, that's Brother Muhammad Abbasi in the UK. He is a co-director for the Association of British Muslims. Now, we will stay with this subject of a humanitarian response to the suffering of the Syrian people who are still in the country, and look at a humanitarian shipment that has been successfully delivered recently to 4 Syrian towns. These are rural areas, outlying areas from the major metropolitan cities that have successfully received shipments by the World Food Program of the United Nations. In fact, there have been 45 trucks, 45 lorries of food aid that has recently arrived to 4 different towns. And a spokesperson for the World Food Program for Syria, that is the director, Mr. Jacob Kern, said that this convoy has brought extraordinary relief for 60,000 people who are in dire need of food and medical supplies. And we have who were cut off from humanitarian access for 5 months. This is very, very important, and it is oftentimes difficult to get clearance, obviously, in a conflict area. But they've successfully delivered this food. It includes various types of food, such as flour, wheat, vegetable oil, sugar, salt, beans, chickpeas, and various other kinds of food staples that can help people meet their basic needs to sustain their lives, at least until circumstances can be improved. Mr. Kern also says that elsewhere in Syria, where we are extremely concerned about more than 25,000 people who are trapped in eastern Aleppo. This is a city that was recently bombarded. He's saying that they're very concerned about these people because they're cut off from food, water, medicine, and other essential supplies. He says that we call on all parties to this terrible conflict to immediately open transport routes that allow unconditional, unimpeded, sustained, and safe humanitarian access to those in eastern Aleppo and even family that are across Syria that need our support, end quote. Again, the director for the World Food Program for Syria talking about the successful delivery of aid and also looking at the continued and ongoing needs that need to be met. So we have a small thing to be celebrated, and that is that people, 60,000 of them, will have their basic needs met for some period of time while we continue to pray and hope for an end to the fighting. We would like, inshallah, we have 2 items that are not related to Syria. One item that's not related to Syria. It's in the United Kingdom. We have 2 things actually in the UK. The first of them it is related to Syria. It's about a Syrian activist. She's an anti-government activist against the regime of Bashar al-Assad, who is an award-winning activist. We're referring to Sister Zina Erhim. She actually traveled from Turkey to the UK to participate in an award ceremony where she recently won an award. One of them last year that she won was by this organization, a well-known journalistic organization, Reporters Without Borders. They awarded her a prize that is Women on the Front Line for the year 2015. She says that when she traveled to the UK, the authorities detained her and confiscated her passport, her Syrian passport, because the Syrian government had ordered them to do so. They reported this as a stolen passport, but she believes that it was just a cover story to try and frustrate her efforts to travel outside of the country and talk about all the things that are happening by the Assad regime. She said, explaining her experience, Ms. Erahim, she said, quote, that they told me that my government reported my passport as being stolen and they have to confiscate it. They told me that they are returning the passport to the regime, she said. She also says that the regime can't kill me in the UK, so it's easier for them to just report me as stealing my own passport and force me to just be floating all over the place, end quote. She said the regime is killing us inside Syria, and obviously Britain and other countries are helping them to reach us while we are traveling abroad with valid visas and valid passports, end quote. Now, in terms of the British government, the UK Interior Ministry responded to this subject saying, quote, that our first priority is the security of our borders, and if a passport is reported as lost or stolen by a foreign government, we have no choice but to confiscate it. In terms of what she plans to do from this point on, now that she doesn't have a passport, she's a Syrian national, displaced to Turkey, traveling to the UK to attend an award ceremony, and she doesn't have a passport now because the British authorities took it away from her. She says, quote, that now I only have my old passport that that is completely full, meaning the pages are full of stamps. So I don't really know how Turkey is going to treat me once I go back to Turkey. We pray that she can safely travel and not have to face any unnecessary or cruel and unusual treatment by either the British or the Turkish or other authorities. And we appreciate her leadership, very bold for a young sister to be active as an advocate against the Syrian regime. But it also is a very interesting story because it shows us the reach, despite this regime of Bashar al-Assad being considered as a horrible regime in the world, they still have currency, with the British government at least. And so we again pray for her success, her safety, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect her as she continues to serve the Muslim Ummah. We would like to move to our last news item for tonight. As I said, it keeps us in the United Kingdom. We go to a light news item. It's not related to Syria. It has to do with a prominent London newspaper. It's called the Evening Standard. Each year they identify people in the city of London who they believe are very influential people, that they want to acknowledge their accomplishments, their work to make London a better place. One of them this year includes a young Muslim man. He is a student, a medical student. His name, Naveed Khan, and he has been identified in this project, this program, by the Evening Standard's Progress 1000 is the name of this project, Progress 1000. He has been identified. They have different categories to award people and cite the accomplishments of these people. He's been acknowledged for an equality champion. Okay, so Mr. Naveed Khan is being acknowledged as an equality champion for the Evening Standard's Progress 1000 for the year 2016. And also, this is, they say that Naveed was chosen for his dedication to creating a more equal society. They said this is a commitment that has been reflected in his work as a head of an homelessness arm of an organization called the Acts of Random Kindness Project, the ARK. This is a campaign in Britain. So we applaud this young brother, Naveed Khan, a medical student in London, who's being acknowledged for his accomplishments. And among the things that he accomplished in this project, this Acts of Random Kindness project, looking at the subject, working against homelessness, he raised 700,000 British pounds last year. So we applaud him again, congratulate the Evening Standard for acknowledging this young Muslim, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give him a bright future serving the Muslim Ummah and his country, England, and the world at large. This will be the last news item that we have scheduled for tonight. Thank you very much for being with us. We will continue Hada tonight after a look at the expected weather. Before we look at weather, we'd like to look at one item from this day in history. It takes us to Egypt. We go back to the year 1822. This has to do with the Rosetta Stone. This is an ancient Egyptian artifact that had engraved on it 3 languages. And because the 3 languages, it was a royal decree by the king at the time, who was King Ptolemy V, is dated to the year 196 BC. And this was a decree by King Ptolemy about one of his coronation. Typically, these things are about coronations, about military victories, etc. And the reason this is so important is because on this day in history, a French scholar named Champollion was able to decipher the meaning of the Rosetta Stone, and by doing this, he unlocked the way to understanding the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Before 1822, when he made this accomplishment, people looked at the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. They didn't know what they meant. There were many efforts accomplished to try and accomplish this, including Muslim scholars, but all failed until 1822. Champollion was successfully deciphered because of the 3 languages that were printed on this, including ancient Egyptian, Greek language, and a language referred to as the Demotic language. So significant in terms of understanding the civilization that brought us Pharaoh, that we read about in the Holy Quran when Musa, peace be upon him, successfully defeated Pharaoh's army. We look at the expected weather for tomorrow and come back to continue looking at Syria in our social segment. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Hada Tonight. We have 2 segments in our social segment tonight. I'm going to be hosting a discussion with our guest looking at the political aspect of the ongoing crisis in Syria in general, and also specifically looking at Aleppo. Following our discussion, we're going to be talking about half an hour, and then Brother Junaid Dar is going to be hosting, inshallah, Sheikh Muhammad Salah, looking at the Islamic perspective of the same subject. Please let me introduce our guest for this evening, Dr. Emaad.muhanna. Thank you very much for being with us. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Can we please start, Doctor, giving people an understanding of the general historical context that has led up to the current status quo in Syria?
Well, Syria, very much like the rest of the Arab world, very much ruled and governed by certain harsh military rules that basically involved, discrimination, involved violation of human rights, not just economic and political crisis, but also violation of all aspects of rights that people are entitled to. During the 70s and 80s, we've seen a lot of dictatorship. Hafez al-Assad, we've seen Gaddafi, we've seen Mubarak in Egypt, and a number, Bouteflika in Algeria. So there were a number of dictators ruling the Arab world during the 70s and 80s. And I think that all erupted with the Arab Spring that started in Tunisia in 2011, followed by Egypt, and then by Libya and Syria. I think it's the rise of new era where young people are involved in politics. So I think it's to do right at the beginning with the political participation in the rule and decision making, where people were marginalized in the past, very much victimized, had no rights, particularly political and religious rights. So with the rise of the Arab Spring, and we're not really saying it's right or wrong, but people on the ground level in a number of Arab countries say that the Arab Spring basically helped people to understand what freedom means. It helped people to understand the value of their life. It helped people to understand the rights that they should have, and they never really had a chance to gain such rights. Syria was one of the situations. The uprising succeeded in Tunisia with the replacement there, and succeeded in Egypt with the replacement of Mubarak, and in Syria it became very complicated. And I think here, because of external powers that participated in the actual course of the uprising, and we started to see the involvement of Russia and involvement of the United States. And I think here it's to do with the issue of being a neighbor to Israel, and it threatens the Israeli national security. So the issue really had a lot of external hands playing with it, and basically some powers are supporting Bashar with weapons and tactics. The others are supporting people on the ground level. At the same time, also had the spread of Daesh during that time, also made it very complicated and very hard to solve. So unfortunately, Syria has become a situation where it's not easy to solve, because it became a theater now for all superpowers to exercise their jurisdiction, if you like, over the Arab world. During that time, we would have expected the Arab League would have a better stand, since it is an Arab land, the killer and the victim of both Arab. Basically, it will affect not just Syria, but it affects all the neighbors, and it affects the national security of the Arabs, since you've got Russia coming in, you've got the British, you've got the NATO overall. So the Arab land has become a theater for superpowers to play and exercise their power over our national security. Unfortunately, at this point, it has impacted negatively on civilians and poor people. So it started from the beginning being a political conflict around who rules the country. And then in the end, it reached a situation where you're not worried about the political outcome now. You're actually worried about people that are in there. Other powers are making it even worse, like Hezbollah, the involvement and the support of Iran to Bashar, as well as the Hezbollah, the playing with Israel as well, because as long as Syria becomes a chaos, they will never ask for a Golan Heights. So they also have a benefit. Iran has a benefit. Russia considers Syria as the gate for their national security on the southwest. So it really got out of hand. And I think the Arabs here are really watching. Nothing they can do, because it already got out of their hands. And now with not even with the United Nations, because they can't do anything. It's between the United States and Russia. And what is happening in there, at this point, we're not really worried about what's happening on the political level, as long as people on the ground level are surviving. And I think this is the most important, is the aid, and how we can get these people that been displaced all over the world to get settled.
I want to jump ahead. Thank you for contextualizing the situation, Professor. I want to jump ahead to the end, the last question that I normally would ask, and ask you the solution. Maybe I should even remove the word solution and say, what ultimately do you think is going to happen? Is the militarization going to continue to escalate? Do you eventually see diplomatic efforts working? How I mean, this is not sustainable. At some point, something has to break, and what is it going to be?
I think on the we've got to let's take the two approaches: the military solution, or the military approach, and the diplomatic approach. Military approach always starts, particularly in the Middle East. It doesn't start in other areas where there is a conflict. You always start with the diplomatic approach. So to save people, money for weapons and killing and chaos. But in the Arab world, we've noticed in all crises, always the military comes first. Why? Because we should understand that these people in a Western society are not really interested in solving the problems. They're interested in fixing their feet in the ground and remain. Because we had in previous episode talked about the interest of Russia to get into the warm waters of the Middle East because of resources. So they have an economic interest. United States has been there for a while. You've got countries like Qatar, for example. They give them a military base, so they're already there. They're close to Turkey because part of the NATO, and they have a big base in Turkey. They're already now here in Syria on a ground level. They are basically the father of Israel, so they already there. Their political agreements with Egypt and Saudi Arabia makes them also economically existent. So we can't run away from the situation. So when it comes to military, I think it will continue, but the end of it, it's going to be like Iraq. Nothing is left, and then we talk about the redevelopment or rebuilding Syria, as we are talking now about rebuilding Iraq after it already collapsed. You've got 5-6 million people drinking water from the sewage, 5-6 million people are refugees. The whole country is totally destroyed, which was the second power in the Middle East.
Syria?
No, Iraq.
Iraq.
Okay. So what I'm trying to say, it's a situation that repeats itself. It's a scenario that gets repeated, and that's where I'm getting my answer from, is that it's not going to start diplomatically, because if it started diplomatically, it would have started long ago. At this point, it's the military, and not just one side that's taking a military action. It's got the two sides. So both are bombing, and the country is suffering. So you've got basically the left wing is bombing and the right wing is bombing, and in the end, people are paying the price.
The African proverb, when elephants fight, the grass gets trampled.
Exactly. So that's the point around the military. I think later on, when it becomes all on the ground, it's going to go through the diplomatic, and my expectation is Bashar is going to withdraw, gets a political refugee somewhere else, and the grass, or the people on the ground level that sit with the problems. Now we need to rebuild Syria. We need to, go for reconciliation, between Shia and Sunnis and Arabs and non-Arabs. So it's a situation or a scenario that repeats itself. And in the end, I hear say that it's not the fault of the leaders only. It's the fault of people on the ground level, because people on the ground level sometimes don't learn. We just take one side. I expected that when the Iraqi people on the ground level, brought the statue of Saddam Hussein down and say, here is a tyrant, is gone. If you don't solve your problems internally, the West is not going to solve it. The West is just going to bring you down to the end.
I'd like to ask you about the actors. There are so many different organizations and groups on the ground. Is your sense that most of the actors, the armed actors, are they motivated by opportunism, just materialism, or do they have an ideology?
Yes, it is an ideological, first of all. Let's go back in the 70s and 80s. Syria had an army in Lebanon and withdrew after the Hariri assassination. So here you've got a problem between Lebanon and Syria around this issue. Secondly, Hezbollah, it's a major player in the region. Thirdly, you've got Israel and the connection between Syria and Hezbollah. I think Israel wouldn't worry about Bashar very much, because they already have a peace agreement, so it's not really going to worry them. What worries them is the support of Hezbollah. That's on the ground level internally. You've got Daesh on one side again, causing a problem, and you don't know who is Daesh with. You've got the, if we take the circle a bit wider, you talk about the neighbors. Palestine with the occupation, you've got Egypt, you've got Saudi Arabia, and I think there is some differences here among the Arabs between who supports Bashar and what he's doing and who supports people on the ground level, and Bashar must go. Take the circle a bit wider, you find the external superpowers that basically have interest around the existence of superpowers, and we shouldn't really take this for granted, because for superpowers it's an issue of national security. Syria, away from or a little bit far from Russia, but it's an extension of their national security, such as Georgia, such as Iran. That's how Russia looks at it. America is there because of Israel, so it's not going to go away very soon.
So, Doctor, we're ready to look at a report on our subject of Syria. We'll come back to continue with Professor Emaad.
The Syrian regime aims at fostering the fragmentation of the rebel factions to begin the political negotiations from a position of strength. As the strategy unfolds, pockets of rebels will remain on the ground, but they will be so divided and disconnected one from one another that the regime can negotiate ceasefires on a case-by-case basis. This will allow the regime to remain the strongest player in any future negotiation. Apart from Aleppo being the largest city in Syria and the economic capital, whose recapturing would be of a military and psychological significance, the regime and its allies know that it would be impossible to defeat the armed oppositions and reclaim all the Syrian territory. The UN has said Aleppo is facing the most intense bombardment since the start of the Syrian war. The US has accused Russia of a barbarism in Syria. Russian airstrikes paved the way for the diverse regime-affiliated ground forces to create a new reality on the ground before reaching any ceasefire agreement. The fact that rebel-held territories are now scattered and isolated will shape the conditions and content of any ceasefire agreement. The worst violence to hit the divided city in years continued on Monday, with residents warning that stores of food and vital medical supplies were dwindling to nothing. It was the fourth day of intense air raids in the city since a defiant Assad regime launched a new assault, vowing to retake all of Aleppo. Rescue efforts have been severely hampered because bomb damage has made roads impassable and because civil defense centers and rescue equipment have been destroyed in raids. Civil defense workers say that rescuers have only 2 fire trucks and 3 ambulances left in Aleppo, and that 3 fire trucks, 2 ambulances, and 3 vans had been hit in the past week. The only crime of the Syrian people is having voiced their disgust to their government's oppression. Yet the world continues to watch insensitively the Syrian future, only to bring to justice years down the road what would be already too late to reverse. While the world is hypnotized by the boogeyman named ISIS, whose theatrical introduction has set the stage for these horrific scenes and heinous destruction brought about by Russia and the Syrian regime get materialized, the so-called civilized nations are in a state of see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. We will continue our conversation with Professor Emaad.muhanna on the subject of Syria, in particular looking at this military intensification in the city of Aleppo. Professor, thank you again for being with us. You were talking before this report, looking at the larger context. I want to go back and ask you another question. Is it the geographical location of Syria that makes it more complicated than other Arab countries where we saw Arab Springs? Is that the basic nature?
Definitely. It is definitely different. You've got the north, you've got Turkey, and here we've got about some political differences and arguments between the 2 countries. So how do you get Turkey to help you through a military intervention? Through the NATO, it really makes the situation escalate even further. And on the south, you've got Israel, and you can't go from there. On the other side, you've got basically, extension to Lebanon and to Jordan. And Jordan is never going to allow any Arab, even involvement or international involvement from that. Jordan never really interfered in that. They don't really just get into Arab conflicts at all. They remained, or as always, since King Hussein away from any conflicts, and they're not interested into settling anything. They can participate in diplomatic solutions, but on a military side, they just don't. Why? Because not because they believe that's right. It's because Jordan has the longest border with Israel. It's over 600 kilometers with Israel. So if you get to Jordan, you're already in Israel. So if you look at the side of Israel and the side of Jordan are both regarded Israeli, jurisdiction. When it comes to extension, as we talked about the circles of violence internally, from what kind of people they fight among each other. Is it between the regime and rebels, like civilian rebels? Or is it a regime that is Shia and the rebels are Muslims, as they say, in some reports they are the Muslim Brotherhood? So here it takes a totally different perspective. Is it that the regime, a political regime, fighting with rebels that are civilians without any ideologies? Is it like that? I don't think so. There is internally, the people on the rebels, you get Muslims and you might get Shia as well. Bashar represents the Shia. So
all this fighting is a convenient opportunity,
absolutely,
to
settle and get a piece of the cake at the maximum. And this is exactly what happened in Iraq. Now you've got a voice for the Kurdi people. You've got a voice for Shia against the Sunnis. So in the end, what you're talking about in Iraq will be repeated in Syria. A division, you've got a Shia and a Sunnis, and you might have a Durzis as well as a third side. And here the division of Syria, as it might happen, as we've seen it in Iraq, will have a more complicated criteria for division, because now it has to serve Israel as the neighbor. When it comes to the larger or the largest circle of factors or powers involved, is Russia and United States. I think they wanted always continuing, and this is for a simple reason, because it's economic. Here it's not really about the rights of people. It's about economic gains. If you look at the land...
Sorry, can we come back to economic gains by these world powers, the United States and Russia, after we take a phone call from Saudi Arabia? We have on the phone with us, inshallah, Sheikh Omar Al-Juhani. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Welcome to Hada Tonight.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. Brother Ali, Jazakallah khair, and greetings to your guest.
Yes, thank you so much, Sheikh, for taking the time to be with us for a very painful subject in the Muslim Ummah, and that is Syria. And we're talking about this because of this unprecedented level of military action by Russia and Syria in Aleppo. I'd like for you to speak to this from a humanitarian perspective, and how we as Muslims, Sheikh, should be looking at this subject.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ونصلي ونسلم على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا وبعد. We invoke the peace and the blessings of Allah upon the messenger of Allah who was sent as a mercy to mankind, and the one who taught us that when a calamity overcomes Muslims, that we should supplicate this supplication. لا إله إلا الله العظيم الحليم، لا إله إلا الله رب العرش العظيم، لا إله إلا الله رب السماوات ورب الأرض ورب العرش الكريم. Indeed, the situation, this unrelenting assault on Aleppo, has reached the worst degree yet. Even though Syria in general, Akhi, has been facing chaos for years, but the escalation, unfortunately, is on the rise. And really, all principles, all morals have been set aside, and then humanity today really is at a serious crossroad. The killing of women and children and infants. We've seen many photos, we've seen many images of young infants as young as 1 and 2 years old drowning on beach shores, or killed because of the extreme bombing. And really, when we want to describe what's going on, these are literally crimes, war crimes, the least to be said about these barbaric actions that are perpetrated by the Syrian regime and backed by the Russian army with the air coverage by the U.S. And this is a dichotomy, that many of us have lacked to understand yet. That this really is a continuation of the crusade against Muslims. Unfortunately, many of us might not want to face this fact. In Iraq, it was manifested in the invasion, the U.S. invading Iraq. That was the Western Church. Today, the Eastern Church is taking its share of the, as the brother in the studio was talking about, the cake that they would like to divide amongst themselves. And yes, there are interests involved in what's going on, but in reality, there is this greater agenda that is to keep the Ummah. And Syria is known to rise in many times, and it's produced scholars. It's produced many elements that have benefited this Ummah. So they look at Iraq as being the capital of the Muslim Ummah in the past. They look at Syria as being potentially the area where many leaders might rise. And unfortunately, this is why this campaign against the Syrian people is taking place. The world, on the other hand, has expressed their anger. I'm talking about the common individual. We find hashtags, for example, about Halab Tahtarik in Arabic. It's been the #1 on the list for the past few days. In English, it's been the 3rd on the list for a few days. The problem here is the political agenda, the agenda that takes the side of oppression, the side of killing innocent people, when it's directed towards Muslims, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And really within this agenda, there's the unfolding of, or the uncovering of masks. You find that Iran today, the country that claims to be an Islamic republic, an Islamic country, they are responsible, as Russia is responsible, as the Syrian regime is responsible for the killing and the murdering of the people of Syria. They are definitely also responsible, and only one who blinds themselves by choice would deny this fact. Let me actually give a few examples of how barbaric the killing in Syria is happening.
And Sheikh, I'm sorry to interrupt you. As you continue to wrap up your comments, we're very short on time. We have about 30 seconds left for the phone call. Please think about how you'd like to end your remarks.
Okay, then I'll just conclude with this, Akhi. What we're witnessing is a birth of a great historical era of great significance for this Ummah, inshallah. Even if the campaign is at its peak, we still recognize that this is only the will of Allah Azza wa Jal. And from this painful labor, the birth of leadership for this Ummah, inshallah, will take place. I think we're responsible, Akhi, to give dua to our brothers and sisters in Syria, support them financially, support them by social media. Every person on an individual, collective level, whatever you can do, I think you have that responsibility to carry it out. Jazakumullah khair. May Allah preserve, protect those who support the painful time of back to the path.
Alaikum salam so much, Sheikh. We, I think only about so puts us in east. I get two things up.
Sheikh said gains and gains. These are all that driven by superpowers. Always, as we said, in different colonization taking a different shape. In the past, colonization used to depend on military war, which basically on my behalf and your behalf, superpowers get involved in wars or the destructions of other countries through the people of that. They want to get into, you know, Russia wants to get to Ukraine. So what do? They get part of the Ukrainian people to split from Ukraine and create a civil war. Same thing followed in Egypt in 2011, 2012, in Libya. Now, if you look at Libya, for example, it's a chaos after the bombing of NATO. So the fourth and fifth generation war relies very much on information, as Sheikh said, on a social media, but here also it's very important for people on a ground level, as Arabs and as Muslims, to understand how this policy basically works, in effect that if an external person wants you to fight with me, that would be more effective, and if you and I, our country, so you and I, our own land, just watching, and he feeds into both sides. So if you rebels, for example, they are supported from some external powers. Regime it is supported from external. So how are you going to solve the problem if two sides are being fed information, weapons, logistics, and trade, etc. When it comes to the economics, I think you know, most of the problems lie in the fact that Bashar is being framed as the good side. So if you look at where Russia is doing is the rebels trying to support the regime. Now, have you looked at what the regime is doing to the civilians? That's only a question that we need to answer. United States is talking about Syria, or about how the rebels will take over, and it becomes a situation happening in the Brotherhood. So in the end, brothers are fighting, a killer and a victim. The land is destroyed, our own land. Thirdly, about the redeveloping, the rebuilding of the land that happened with the Western companies. So here, the companies that taken basically the agreements or the Iraq are mainly Western companies. So they bombed Iraq, and they're going to rebuild Iraq economically, and in the end, the political is actually part of the United States to continue. So it's all about economic gain. An approach of Zionism in the world. They ended, or trying to end the military through playing a pseudo war, where I just get the land, you get the right, and then I
reap the benefits.
Get the benefits out of them. So we need to understand that we shouldn't take sides. We should stop taking sides, because that's how things don't get solved. And you find that the two powers are coming in. I get alliance and you get alliance, and then in the end, both are fighting on one land, and it's my own land. So they all playing the game on our land. We are the losers in the end. We lose civilians, we lose socially, we lose politically, we lose economically, and we lose the unity of the Muslim nation. That's the difficulty.
All right. Thank you very much for being with us. A very informative discussion we've had with Professor Muhanna. And if there's anything that I've learned from this discussion, looking at this, if we don't understand anything else, there's a certain type of ideology in the world that doesn't value human life. For economic purposes, we see human lives being destroyed in Aleppo. And if you've ever wondered what it was like for the indigenous people, the Aboriginal people in the Americas or any part of the world who lost their land, lost their life for political economic gains by the occupier, you're witnessing it right now in Palestine, in Aleppo. My own ancestors who were dragged away from West Africa. It was all for economics, destroying human life. And so this thing is still alive and operating and active in the world today. Make no mistake about it. We'd like to take a break, inshallah. Brother Junaid Dar is going to be continuing. He's up next, along with Sheikh Dr. Muhammad Salah, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, dear viewers, joining us on segment number 3 on our live program, Huda Tonight. And I'm your host for this segment, Junaid Dar. Dear viewers, as you've been introduced by our respective presenter Ali Coleman, our discussion today is about the horrific scenes, the horrific images that are coming outside of Syria, and to be specific, what is going on inside of Aleppo. Now, my dear brothers and sisters, we see on the television, social media, images of dead babies, children, women, and families due to the bombardment that is taking place from the government forces. Now, it is reported over the last few days the bombardment has intensified, leaving even more innocent people killed and leaving even innocent people with no hope. It is reported that the city of Aleppo, with 2 million of its citizens, are left without access to food or access to drinking water. Some of the comments that are made by these residents come as follows. They say the bombardment is ferocious. Some of them are saying that the smell of death and destruction is everywhere. And final comment, one particular resident, he says that we beg you to come to our aid. Now, as humanity, as Muslims who believe in the Book of Allah, the words of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what is our role, what is our responsibility, and who is to blame? Some people will say that the blame lies on the Muslims, that they are not doing their job. Others will say that the blame lies on our scholars, they are not guiding us or not teaching us. Others will say, no, the blame lies on our leaders for not protecting us and not aiding those in need. So we've got lots of questions, lots to discuss. Let us begin by introducing our very special guest for the evening, and then we'll go straight into our questions. If I can begin by introducing Dr. Muhammad Salah, who is very regular here at Huda TV with his live program of Ask Huda and Gardens of the Pious. Doctor, I'd like to begin by saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for hosting me, Junaid.
Okay. Doctor, we have with us a very serious but very sad scenario, and I would like to begin by asking you, how would you describe this situation that's taking place now?
Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala nabiyhi wa Mustafa Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walah wa ba'd. The situation all over Syria, particularly in Aleppo, is horrible. It is very much like hellfire. And the sad part, or the saddest part of it, is that we feel helpless, paralyzed. We feel that we can't do much. We see our brothers and sisters being massacred on a daily basis with no mercy whatsoever, with no support from the international community. Rather, you do not only think that there is a conspiracy, it has become certain, has become very obvious that there is definitely a conspiracy. The international community is not intervening until this war criminal and this butcher would finish up his people. I would agree to all what you mentioned earlier, except for one thing when you said the government bombarding its people. This is not a government.
Okay.
It is not definitely a government. This is a militia.
Sure.
And we know who supports this militia. It's not one country or two. There is a big time conspiracy that we feel that the world is turning a blind eye and a deaf ear so that this criminal would finish up the entire people of Aleppo.
Okay.
And dislocate. There is a genocide. They want to move and dislocate the Sunni people, not just the scholars, but the entire Muslim community there. I'm afraid they are working hard day and night through dropping the explosive barrels.
Sure.
And the airstrikes supported by the Russians and the Russian army and aviation. And you are so right. Whom to blame? The scholars, Muslim leaders, Muslim regimes? I believe we're all blameworthy.
Okay.
I can't just simply say only the international community. What do we have armies for?
Sure.
What do we live for? Every time there is a terrorist attack here or there, our Muslim leaders will be the first, in the first row, to show support and solidarity, whether in France, whether in here or there.
Sure.
What about our Muslim brothers and sisters? What about next door?
Sure.
What about the refugees? You want to tell me that it's hard to stop, to make a no-fly zone and to impose it all over Syria? It is not difficult.
Sure.
It is not hard. It is not difficult for the diplomats of the Muslim countries to call for an urgent meeting in the United Nations and to impose, to request and to demand a no-fly zone.
Sure.
It is not really a big deal to support those who are fighting on the ground to eliminate, as we have seen in the past few days or few weeks, that when these guys were given some means of weapons and arms, it didn't take them much to liberate Aleppo.
Sure.
And to remove the siege which was imposed on it for so long, and to free its people. But I think all of us were not doing our homework.
Sure.
All of us are blameworthy.
Doctor, you mentioned so many things in your opening statement, and I want to look at each one of them in a bit more detail. You made mention that the people of Aleppo are suffering for a number of different reasons. And I want to look at the reason of them being Sunni Muslims. Why is it that they are being picked upon just because they are Sunni Muslim? What is the crime of being a Sunni?
Well, if you understand how the world is trying to put a new distribution to the people, not only in Sham but in the Middle East, the new map drawing by getting rid of the Sunnis and replacing them by other Alawis and Nusayris, such as this militia, which is supported obviously by Iran, no doubt, and by the Russians as well. So the Muslims are suffering most. And if you notice that I do not call them Sunni, because Sunnis means Muslims, Muslims mean Sunnis, those who are following the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the vast majority of the Muslim world belong to the mainstream of the Ummah. Yani they are categorized as Sunni Muslims. So there is much can be done. There is definitely much can be done. Take for instance on the government levels, it isn't sufficient to show the testament in the media and objection, because you can't afford to change the situation. Financial embargo and trade, even superpower like Russia. When it comes to money, when it comes to trade, when it comes to business, they will be affected. Recently, we all know that in the reserve there's only $30 billion for a big country like Russia. They cannot afford to place an embargo on them and to boycott importing goods from them. They cannot afford that. In other words, money talk.
Okay, and Doctor, but when you look at Syria and you look at the Alawis, they're very small in number, and someone can even say that the country is very small or insignificant. What is a big country, a powerful country like Russia doing, intervening with such a small country and causing such chaos?
It's not about a small country or a big country, it's about a point of interest.
Sure.
Now we have two camps. We have two armies. We have two powers, the evil power and the weak and the oppressed, who are trying to gain their freedom and gain their rights. The international community once again have proven their hypocritical nature, because if this country or what they call them, the rebels, who are actually the people, the people of Syria, the vast majority of the people of Syria, civilians, women, children, as you see, who is affected much by the bombardment of the militia to the civilians. All what we see in the pictures, they deliberately choose their targets: schools, hospitals, masajid, excuse me, civilian people.
Sure.
Every day we see the rescue teams are trying to extract bodies and look for the searches ongoing 24/7 for any living people under the rubble, and they extract babies, women, while they were breastfeeding their babies. They just lost their lives. They were sitting in shelters, they were sitting in tents, they were sitting hiding in schools, in hospitals. So this is definitely a genocide. If this was happening in any country of interest to the international community, like a country, for instance, that has oil or natural gas, immediately the international community would impose a no-fly zone, like what happened in Libya.
Okay.
It didn't take them weeks to decide, and they didn't wait for an assembly of the United Nations or some country would use a veto right to object. They imposed it. And that helped a great deal in eliminating the regime of the previous governor of Libya.
Okay.
Same could happen, and it could happen actually in a matter of a few days, a few weeks. Yesterday, I just heard the news that the United States was given an apology to the Syrian regime for accidentally killing 70 plus of their soldiers by accident. Oh, so you meant to kill others. Who are the others?
Right, okay.
Civilians, innocent people. And we all now, the international community recognize the Syrian former president as a war criminal.
Okay.
Don't they? And his militia are war criminals and their supporters. So are you doing airstrikes to kill civilians or to kill the criminals?
Okay.
To target whom?
Sure. So
when by accident he said that you killed 77 or 78 of this militia. And why do you have to apologize?
Sure, Doctor. So when we look at the diplomatic process and we look at the other countries, and like you made mention, the two faces or the hypocrisy of these organizations, can we as Muslims have any kind of hope in these talks, in diplomatic affairs, or should we be more focused elsewhere?
Well, we have to work on parallel tracks. But personally, my personal satisfaction is there is no hope in such people.
Okay.
Because their personal interest is giving precedence to the lives of the innocent civilians, of the babies, of the women, of the children. No doubt. We have seen this, and it is happening on every single day. You don't need another eyewitness. You don't need another tangible evidence. We see this all the time. But our hope is not in the diplomatic efforts. Our hope is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You asked earlier whom to blame. I said we're all blameworthy.
Okay.
We're not doing our homework. When we went for Hajj this year, my intention personally was this Hajj was to make most of my dua and my focus in Arafah, in Mina, in Muzdalifah, in the Masha'ir, in Tawaf for Syria.
SubhanAllah.
And for the Syrian people, for the innocent civilians. Okay, and I did declare that in our live shows when I was there, and in my live broadcast on my website, and also to the American community who perform in Hajj with me in the lectures, to remind everyone that your dua is mustajab in these sacred places and during this sacred time. So this is one thing. One thing, I'm not saying that it's a little thing. Again and again and again, I will continue to say that the dua is the sharpest weapon of a believer, and you never know whose dua will be accepted. Imagine for the past 5 years, these criminals and their allies have been bombarding these people for 5 years non-stop.
SubhanAllah.
Non-stop.
SubhanAllah.
And subhanAllah, every now and then we see that the people and their supporters on the ground are claiming more land and marching towards Damascus. If it is only left for the people to gain their freedom, they would. But because of the intervention of other countries, major power, we ask Allah the Almighty to keep them busy with their economical disasters, with poverty, with whatever. Allah the Almighty says in the Quran, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ جُنُودَ رَبِّكَ إِلَّا هُ. He can keep them busy with whatever, so that they won't have time, they won't have effort to exert in supporting the criminals. You know, yes, indeed, as dua, as seekers of knowledge, as laymen, everyone is responsible. For instance, what we're doing right now, after we finished our program and coming back to attend this program in order to raise awareness, we've been doing this. Brother Osama Al-Shami, may Allah have mercy on his soul, and myself, we've done several programs. A couple years ago, it was also about Damascus and raising the awareness in the mind of many people who do not know what is going on the ground. Many people think that it is the government versus the rebels. No. It is the people of Asham. It is the people of Syria, the people whom the Prophet ﷺ admired, the people whom the Prophet ﷺ prophesied what is happening will happen, and Allah will support them. He admired Asham and its people. So those people are trying to gain their freedom.
Sure.
And it was supposed to be this way. The international community was supposed to assist them to gain their freedom.
Excellent.
But this is not what is happening. What is happening is that, you see, the conspiracy is very, it stinks. It is very obvious.
Okay.
You find what is called the so-called Islamic State, which I like to call it the non-Islamic State.
Sure.
Period. On the ground, fighting against whom? You have a common enemy. You have the enemy is very obvious, and he is raising a banner of disbelief, but they are not fighting them. They are oppressing the other civilians. So they're giving hands to the enemies. And that's why, again, I claim that it is non-Islamic state.
Sure.
They do not represent Muslims. Those who help the weak, those who help the oppressed, those who rescue the infants and the children, those who provide them with help are the true people who are supporting them for the sake of Allah.
So the innocent people of Syria are in a sandwich situation where one side they have, like you said, the regime punishing them, and on the other side they have the so-called non-Islamic regime also punishing them from behind their backs.
Why am I calling it a conspiracy? If you look at it this way, the formation of this so-called Islamic, which is a non-Islamic state, just give a reason to forming a coalition from so many different countries. Imagine almost every country is assisting somehow in fighting against the non-Islamic state. As a result, who's hurt? Who's hurt? The civilians.
The victims are always the people.
The innocent people.
Sure.
The women, the children. Because we see this on a daily basis, on a regular basis. But these guys, every day they are producing videos, putting it on the YouTube, having their own websites with a static IP address coming from Europe, showing that they are functioning freely, and it seems like somebody is supporting them.
Sure.
And they have their own territory, so where are they? They're neither bombarded, nor are they fighting against the criminal regime or the oppressors. But it's only the innocent people are being sandwiched in between.
Sure. Okay, Doctor, on that note, we're going to move over and watch a short report together, and then when we come back, inshallah, we'll continue with our discussion. Dear viewers, let's move over to our very first report of the evening, and then when we come back, we'll continue our discussion on Syria with our doctor here. So we will see you all in just a matter of minutes.
The Syrian war has been raging on for 5 years now, and the result is becoming more and more devastating than ever before. Millions of helpless Syrians in Aleppo have been forced out of their homes by rains of missiles and deadly ground fighting in Aleppo. The Syrian government intensified airstrikes in recent days have mainly concentrated pounding rebel-held areas of Aleppo, with more than 250,000 civilians trapped, with the children dying every day. The recent fierce fighting in Aleppo has signaled global concern. Britain's permanent representative to the UN said the attacks had unleashed a new hell on Aleppo. Aid agencies report that in the middle of the conflict, there are at least 100,000 children who are at high risk of being killed or injured by airstrikes and missile explosions in Aleppo. On Sunday, the organization of Save the Children said that approximately half the casualties were children. The organization added, injured children were dying on the floors of hospitals due to lack of equipment and medicines. About half of the early 5 million refugees who have fled Syria are children, but 8 million children remain in the torn country, according to UNICEF. Aleppo was once among the most peaceful cities in the world. Today, the city is falling in destruction. Blood of women and children is spilling in the streets, and the hundreds of people in the besieged city are buried under rubble every day. Aleppo is in dire need of peace after years of deadly battle between government forces and the rebel factions for control. Millions of Syrians are now living on aid and humanitarian assistance, and thousands of families have lost their loved ones in the conflict. The international community is deeply divided over the Syrian conflict, with several interventions on both sides, the Syrian government and the opposition groups. All of this has led to the endless suffering of the Syrian people. The vast majority of those killed or injured and those forced out of their homes are the victims of a war declared by all to kill innocent children, old men and women. And the question remains, when shall the carnage and massacre cease in Syria?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, dear viewers, after watching that short report about Syria, and in particular with the hashtag Save Aleppo. The catastrophe, the killing is ongoing, and the images just keep coming. We keep seeing the images of dead children, of babies, of women, of families, of innocent people. Let us continue our discussion with our very special guest here in the studio, with Dr. Muhammad Salah. Doctor, I would like to ask the question now about Muslim unity. At times we find that Muslims are quite isolated in their own countries, in their own lands. Is it an obligation that the Muslim is connected and feels the pain of these people in Syria?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. These are the basics that we should teach our children, and we should keep reminding ourselves all the time that this ummah should be one single united nation with their different ethnicities and different backgrounds. The Prophet ﷺ said in the sound hadith, the similitude of the believers in their love, in their compassion, in their solidarity is like one single body. So he went further to say that all the believers are but a single body.
Okay.
Then he explained what is the meaning of being a single body. He said, if any body part aches, if any body part is experiencing any pain, the entire body is aching.
SubhanAllah.
From head to toe, because of a little pain in your little toe, from a little pain in the tongue, in the ear, the entire body is aching. The person cannot sleep. And that's why Aleppo matters, Gaza matters, Palestine matters, Burma matters, Kashmir matters. Everywhere where Muslims are in need, it is our responsibility to raise the awareness of their need. So there are some places like in the West.
Okay.
We have non-profit organizations who are capable to raise funds officially, and this fund is monitored, where they have humanitarian aid. They can set up camps for refugees and provide medications, they provide food, they provide shelters. So those who are living in these countries must support them. I'm not talking about giving the 2.5% zakah. I'm talking about every possible mean.
Okay.
Because this person who is homeless, who doesn't have a shelter, is my son and my daughter. So those who have an access to do so, they must. It is very unfortunate in literally all Muslim countries, you're not allowed to do that.
To raise funds for victims?
Yes.
Okay.
So, well, I don't have access to do that. What am I supposed to do?
Okay, interesting. Okay.
What am I supposed to do? I know that once I say make dua, a lot of people say we've been making dua, and your dua is not shredded, your dua is not trashed, your dua does work and it is effective. Your dua, my dua, and the dua of everyone who's making dua. We just also need to choose the right time to make dua.
Sure.
And do the good deeds which make our dua most likely to be accepted. Having the feeling towards those who are in need is an Islamic act of worship, is an Islamic part of our faith, being a part of this ummah, feeling their need, showing the willingness to support by every legal possible mean. You see what I'm saying? Every legal possible mean. You understand that in many countries you're not allowed to raise funds, and you're not allowed to support financially. And if you do, you'll be thrown in prison, you can be tried, you can spend the rest of your life in prison. It won't be smart to do so.
Of course.
On the other hand, we see the so-called Islamic, which I call it the non-Islamic state, are recruiting our youth. I've been to some Islamic centers in London, where I figured that I was shocked to know that a lot of youth, tens of youth, have joined. It's no secret. I'm not talking here about like revealing secrets. Have joined ISIS. Why? Whom to blame? I'm not blaming the youth, because the youth are desperate. The youth see oppression, and they are willing to help. Even those who are not really practicing, it's a matter of being humane, trying to be a human being. And it is ironic that some youth who are non-Muslims join them for the same cause. They wanted to help the weak and the oppressed. But in reality, it's a trap.
And so much so, Doctor, like you're saying, that these young people, they're so desperate to help and so willing to help that they're even willing to give their life away for the sake of it. But
and they do, not just they're willing, they do, and they find a way to do it. They are more true than most of the leaders. But I don't blame them, because they have been deceived. Somebody, you're allowing this to reach them. You're allowing them to access to watch a Hollywoodic production. A Hollywood production that says this is the Islamic State and we're implementing the Sharia and we're supporting this and we're supporting that. Then when you get there, you're stuck. You find yourself in hell. Literally hell on the ground. You've neither supported the weak and the oppressed, nor will you be able to come back in one piece. Even those who wanted to come back, they won't be able, because they won't allow them. So that's why, again, I say it smells, it stinks. It's a big conspiracy. So it is our role, on one hand, to tell those who cannot afford to do much, no, you can do the dua, you can raise the awareness, you can ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely, you can quote ma'asi with the intention of this is like a means of approach to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that He would accept your dua, He would have mercy on those people.
Doctor, I want to look at some of the other ways as well, how we can help. But before we do that, I'd like to turn to the viewers and also make mention that our phone lines are open, so you can call us if you have a question or a query, or you'd like to add something to the program, you'd like to ask the doctor a particular question, feel free to do so. Join us, make this interactive, and give us your questions, give us your thoughts. Doctor, so we're looking at some of the possible solutions, or some of the things we could do to become more active. And we made mention of fundraising for those who are able, and dua for everybody. What about being engaged, like campaigning, raising awareness, using social media? What would you say about that?
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Every possible means that you can afford, we should utilize it. Every effort that we can make, we should utilize it, and we should exert it. So there are a lot of youth who are very professional when it comes to the social media and putting pressure. We should utilize that, and we should support those youth. We should support them to make this great effort to raise this awareness. As you understand that the social media has become definitely the alternative to the biased media. A lot of people, not just the youth, are turning to the social media to learn about what is going on. And instead of watching the typical biased media. So this is an opportunity not to be wasted. There are some people who are politically active in their countries, like Muslims in the West, particularly in the United States, who have an access to speak to their senators, to their congressmen, and put pressure and lobby in order to, you never know, maybe somehow we can get a verdict of making a no-fly zone. It will make a big difference.
Of course.
Just imagine we're not asking you to help, neither financially or support us with weapons and arms. Just impose a no-fly zone all over Syria. It would make a big difference.
So, Doctor, putting pressure on our local MPs, our mayors, those who make decisions in our society, we putting pressure on them is another way.
Those people turn for us at the time of need, whenever they need our votes.
Of course.
And this is the time we need their words. We need their influence in the Congress, in the Senate, and in the Parliament. Otherwise, you don't deserve my vote.
Sure.
You know, we frequently get questions about, is voting halal? Can we vote for a nominee or a candidate who's a non-Muslim in a non-Muslim country? You said, based on the benefit-risk ratio, you vote for the person who promises that he will make Muslims' life better.
Okay.
Who would make things better for Muslims as minorities living in non-Muslim countries. So that's why we have to take advantage of our power. It is not that powerful, but it is something to be considered.
Sure. Okay. Doctor, you mentioned the activities of the youth, for example, on social media. You also made mention of those professionals who are able to engage with politicians and those making decisions. But I want to turn now to the role of the scholars as well. What would you suggest that our scholars should do with regards to the lectures they give in masajid, the khutb they give on Friday sermons? What kind of topic should they be dealing with when we look at this catastrophe?
Correct. Again, based on where you're living, many people are living under Muslim regimes and they're not able to open up their mouth because unfortunately these regimes support or in favor, at least under the table of this militia, of this outist regime. So basically they won't have an access to speak out in public or to give the khutbah. It is imposed on them to speak about how to use a toilet and how to do things which are important, but they are not the priority right now. They have a script. Now many Muslim countries have turned the imams, the speakers like parrots, like an MP3 recorder. You just need to come up and read what is written for you. You cannot go out of the text. So I'm not asking you to throw yourself in jail or in prison,
Sure.
But I'm talking about those who can afford to do something, to speak about it. We have a room like here in Huda TV. We have a room right now to do that, to raise this awareness, to speak to people that it is the duty of every Muslim to speak about it. It is the duty of every Muslim to put pressure on those whom they know that they can help.
Sure.
To make an effort. So they have to utilize the access that they have. In the past, it was the member, the pulpit of the Prophet ﷺ, which would move armies, which would liberate countries, which would defeat the enemies. And because of that, the enemies of Islam recognize the significance, the importance, and the danger of the masjid and of the speaker and of the khutbah. So they invested heavily in creating puppets. People who don't even have enough knowledge. People who are only worried about their provision because they're living hand to mouth. They are very careful and very keen to control the masajid, the speakers, the schools, the universities, So there are some people whom we cannot ask them to do much. Because the situation doesn't allow them to do so, especially when they see others wasted so many years of their lives behind bars. It is not a waste. Whoever does so for the sake of Allah, he will be rewarded for that.
Sure.
But I'm not asking anyone to do anything beyond their capacity, because Allah didn't ask anyone to do anything that they cannot afford to do. But those who have an access to do that, they should. This is a priority. It doesn't make any sense when we see these innocent people, innocent kids, infants, being bombarded and killed on a regular basis, and you speak about a secondary subject which doesn't concern the ummah at large right now. Even if it is a sunnah, even if it is an act which is recommended, but what is the priority? Saving lives. You see what happens whenever there is a shooting here or there. Everybody changes, not necessarily everybody, a lot of people change their images on their social media to be the flag of France or the flag of this.
Even those speakers that are talking about these secondary subjects,
Yes,
they will be the
sir.
first to come out.
Yes, sir. Why? Because they know that they are being watched and they will be applauded for that. Our target should be pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Subhanallah.
And to please Allah the Almighty, you should be worried and concerned about our brothers and sisters in these places.
Doctor, we have come to the end of our program, but before we conclude, it's always good to hear some words of encouragement from our seniors. Can you give us, in just 10, 20 seconds, some words of encouragement that which will uplift us in these very desperate times?
You see, I'm very optimistic with all the darkness that we're living in. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said in many ahadith, many bisharas, many good news, particularly about Ash-Sham. One of the companions asked the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, whenever it is the time of trials, where shall I resort to, where shall I live? He said, go to Ash-Sham. And he said in one hadith, إذا فسد الشام إذا فسد أهل الشام فلا خير فيكم. Which means that it will be like the last fortress for the believers. If the people of Ash-Sham, Aleppo, Damascus, and the entire Sham area, and Ash-Sham, by the way, is not only Syria. Ash-Sham is Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, and Jordan. This whole area is called Ash-Sham. So Palestine is also in the core of Ash-Sham. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, لا تزال طائفة من أمتي ظاهرين على الحق لا يضرهم من خذلهم إلى قيام الساعة. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prophesied that this party would be always victorious, will be always committed to the deen, and no one will be able to persuade them, to deviate them from the straight path until the day of judgment will be in Ash-Sham. The Prophet ﷺ said in another hadith, until Jesus the son of Mary descends, where will he descend?
Damascus.
The eastern minute in Damascus. And he will lead the only Muslim army, the Muslim army which came out of the peninsula, led by Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Mahdi. And who fought against this Muslim army? Initially Muslims in the peninsula.
Subhanallah.
Yes, of course. And then Allah will make him victorious. And when he will come to Ash-Sham, Jesus the son of Mary will descend. And he will join him to pray behind him. Then he would lead the army to chase whom? The false Messiah. And then Allah the Almighty will grant him victory. And he will chase the false Messiah all the way to the gate of Lud in Palestine. And he will eventually kill him. Then the Ummah will live in a very prosperous time during the time that Jesus the son of Mary, inshaAllah, would live on earth after his second descent.
Sure. Thank you very much, Doctor, for that very comprehensive answer. We have come to the end of the program, so I would like to thank you personally for coming to the show and giving us your expertise on the subject as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to conclude by saying Assalamu alaikum.
Before we conclude, I'd like to ask the viewers to make dua for our brothers and sisters in Aleppo, particularly in Ash-Sham in general. Allahumma ansur Ash-Shama wa ahlaha. Allahumma ansur Ash-Shama wa ahlaha. Allahumma ansur ikhwanana al-mustad'afina bil-Sham. Allahumma ansur ikhwanana al-mustad'afina bil-Sham. Allahumma alayka bi'a'daika ya Rabbal alameen. Allahumma alayka bi'aduwwihim wa aduwwihim. اللهم انصرهم على من عاداهم اللهم انصرهم على من ظلمهم اللهم أطعمهم من جوع اللهم أمنهم من خوف اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم يا رب العالمين اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين في كل مكان اللهم انصر المسلمين المستضعفين في كل مكان اللهم نصرك الذي وعدت اللهم نصرك الذي وعدت اللهم نصرك الذي وعدت وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم
صلى الله عليه وسلم آمين آمين بارك الله
فيك بارك.
Dear viewers, we've come to the end of our program here. Let's think about these wise words. Just not let them pass by. Let's think about the dua that was made. It's a serious matter when we look at the lives of innocent babies, women and children and families all being killed for no reason. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect them and to liberate them. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to strengthen us and strengthen our iman. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this deen victorious just as He has promised. My dear brothers and sisters, we will conclude here and we will continue with this series tomorrow as well. So until our program tomorrow, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.